Hi, Briefs for Cinema. Today I'm going to explain a badass motherfucking anime adaptation called Fullmetal Alchemist. Spoilers ahead, so watch out and take care. The movie is based in a fictional town called Resemble where people practice a rare form of art known as alchemy. Using this art, one can mold common metals like iron and cobalt, as well as precious ones like gold. However, there are also people who use this art for transmutation, which is to resurrect dead humans. It is not safe at all, and rumors say that if the procedure goes wrong, there are grave consequences. I heard that one guy even lost his dick. In the first scene, we are introduced to the Ulrich brothers, Edward and Alphonse, who have been self-learning alchemy from a young age. They mostly use books from their library to carry out their experiments. One day, they prepare a toy and happily show it to their mother, who congratulates them with a warm hug. However, after they leave to play, she unexpectedly passes away due to a cardiac arrest. The boys now have no one to look after them, and their days start turning into desperation. Not willing to give up on their mother, Edward comes up with an idea. He mentions that using the alchemy book, they can practice what they read about. Alphonse agrees to help, and in the next scene, the two brothers start their preparations.
物体を作り変える術、それが錬金術。錬金術師の兄弟エドとアルは死んだ母親を生き返らせようとして失敗。エドは手足を、アルは体すべてを失った。
The brothers gather the ingredients as per the book and place them at the center of the transmutation circle. As soon as they begin chanting the ritual, a dangerously large amount of energy starts forming around the house, which eventually turns into a vortex. At this point, the brothers finally realize that their experiment has gone awry, but it is too late. The vortex ultimately rips their house apart and destroys everything in sight, maybe even their bodies. The movie then fast-forwards by 20 years, and the grown-up Edward is chasing after a priest with a mysterious red stone. It is revealed that the magical rock is capable of performing alchemy. When the priest is cornered, he uses the stone to unleash stone pillars, forcing Edward to retreat. Following this, he summons several terrifying monsters from the underworld, and Edward also conjures up his magic spear, revealing that he has become a master alchemist. Right then, a giant armored figure appears and starts beating up the monsters one by one. He uses his immense strength and throws them around like ragdolls, but in the process, his helmet gets knocked off. Surprisingly, the armor has no head, and his body is completely hollow from the inside. Meanwhile, Edward finishes off the rest of the monsters and reveals that he, too, has prosthetic limbs. He then mentions that because of this trait in his body, everyone calls him the Fullmetal Alchemist. He strikes the priest with his prosthetic arm. Big Arm causes the latter's redstone to get knocked off just when it appears as if he has completed his mission. The military, led by Colonel Mustang, arrives and apprehends both Edward and the alchemist. Edward begs for the rock, which he calls the Philosopher's Stone, but Colonel Mustang quickly showcases that it is a fake. This devastates Edward as he has been looking for the real one for years. Meanwhile, the armor also arrives and reveals that he is none other than Edward's younger brother. Everyone heads to the military base where Colonel Mustang argues that there is no such thing as a Philosopher's Stone, and tells them to stop talking about that Harry Potter-s. The one that they encountered earlier was simply an amplifier which has no transmutation abilities at all. However, Edward is still hopeful that the Real Stone is out there somewhere, and he is desperately looking for it so that he can regenerate his brother, and also his lost limbs. After the meeting, as Edward is preparing to head home, he meets his childhood best friend Winry. She mentions that she learned about him through the news and now wants to help him in his mission of finding the Philosopher's Stone. Elsewhere, The priest reaches a dark room where a trio of magical gangsters led by the ferocious leader, Lust, are waiting for him. The group has two other members, Envy, a tall being who can transform into anyone, and Gluttony, a fat human who has the ability to devour anything. It turns out that the priest was sent on an errand, but since he couldn't get the job done, Lust is furious, and as a punishment,
久しぶりだな、鋼の。大佐。
失った体を取り戻すために絶対に必要なもの。
賢者の石はただの伝説に過ぎない。
賢者の石。
あの兄弟の力になってやりたい。
これ以上あの石に関わらない方が身のためだ。
賢者の石は実在する。
鋼の坊よ、知りすぎたわね。
俺たちの計画が。
The priest was sent on an errand, but since he couldn't get the job done, Lust becomes furious and extends her claws to punish him. She impales him brutally, and once the priest is dead, Gluttony swoops in and devours them. Meanwhile, Edward is trying to get some sleep, but he keeps having visions of the failed transmutation process from 20 years ago. Suddenly, he is brought to the gate of truth, where all knowledge of the universe lies. The gate opens, and he is sucked inside by creepy tentacles. Edward is sent flying through the universe, and at one point he sees his mother in the distance. Desperately trying to reach out to her, he is brought outside the gate again. However, now Edward has vast knowledge of alchemy and can use it without the book. Then, a transparent deity appears and introduces himself as God. He says that anyone who wants to bring their loved ones back from the dead will have to make a deal. Saying this, he takes one of Edward's limbs away as Edward had tried to bring his mother back. Later, Edward wakes up in his house, which is still intact, but his limb is missing, and even his brother Alphonse is nowhere to be found. This makes him realize that his brother had sacrificed himself for the alchemy. Edward tries to go near the place where they had conducted the experiment, and notices a mound, which resembles nothing close to their mother. Enraged, he knocks over his armor set and starts transmuting to bring his brother back. The plan works, and he is brought outside the Gate of Truth, where the deity is waiting for him. However, since he has requested his brother's life, the deity takes Edward's ability to perform alchemy in exchange.
台無しじゃん。ホムンクルス。
もう生かしてはおけないわね。
この空っぽの体で何を信じろって言うんだよ。
たった二人の兄弟じゃないの。
どこのどいつだこんなこと考えやがるの。こんなことってありかよ。
In the previous events, Edward wakes up in his bed with two missing limbs, while his brother, Alphonse, has been brought back to life in the form of armor. In the present, Colonel Mustang takes the brothers to an experienced alchemist named Tucker, hoping to gather information on the Philosopher's Stone. Once they arrive at his mansion, Tucker shows them his inventions, including hybrid organisms created by fusing different animals. He reveals that he was a prominent state alchemist working for the government, but all his experiments were deemed useless, and he was kicked out. He is now trying to come up with new inventions to regain his position. However, Edward reveals his entire story and why he is after the Philosopher's Stone during a private meeting with Tucker. Although Tucker doesn't know the stone's exact location, he agrees to help retrieve it. Edward and Winry board a train to another city to meet Dr. Marco, another scientist who knows about the Philosopher's Stone. Unfortunately, their first meeting is hostile as Marco mistakes them for bad guys and points a gun at them. In response, Edward tries to calm him down but ends up knocking him out. When Marco regains consciousness, he refuses to talk about the Philosopher's Stone for their own good. Suddenly, the deadly woman appears, and Marco shoots at the window to alert them.
まさか兄さん、ダメだ。
鋼の錬金術師。
Lost, a deadly woman who was spying on a trio, fatally stabs Marco and reveals that the truth about the stone's origins can be found in Laboratory 5. Edward, one of the trio, learns that Laboratory 5 is a military cannery that is actually a large transmutation circle. One of the senior captains of the military discovers this as well, but Lost kills him and Envy frames Colonel Mustang for the murder. Meanwhile, Tucker, a mad scientist, reveals that he sacrificed his daughter and pet dog for his experiment and created a unique creature from his wife's body parts. Edward beats him up but is stopped by Alphonse. After weeks of research, Edward learns about Laboratory 5 and rushes there with his team. Tucker also escapes from captivity. Meanwhile, one of the senior captains of the military conducts additional research on Lab 5 and discovers that it is actually a large transmutation circle, and something is being created there. He tries to inform his superiors, but unfortunately, Lust stops him from doing so. Somehow, the captain manages to rush out of the house and enters a payphone to call his general, but envy takes on the form of Colonel Mustang and kills him. The plan is to frame the colonel and put him behind bars for a long time. Unfortunately, the plan works, as bystanders witness the incident and immediately report it to the authorities. In the next scene, the mad scientist, Tucker, also escapes from captivity. Edward and his friends are apprehended by the military on grounds of being associated with the murder of Mustang. They are then locked inside a room, but Edward, using his quick thinking, freezes the group and helps them escape. Following this, they steal a vehicle and arrive at the premises of Laboratory 5, where Colonel Mustang is in a standoff with another lieutenant. To everyone's surprise, Mustang snaps his fingers and sets the lieutenant on fire. Just as it seems that Colonel Mustang has gone insane, the burning lieutenant suddenly transforms herself, revealing that it was Envy in disguise. Soon, the rest of the bad guys arrive, and Lust stabs Colonel Mustang in the abdomen, injuring him severely. Then, she flees the scene with Edward following her closely. Soon after, Edward arrives at an abandoned room where a large transmutation circle is drawn. Before he can even make sense of the situation, the mad scientist, Tucker, shows up, brings out a philosopher's stone from his pocket, and reveals that these things are actually mass-produced inside. It is revealed that the items are actually mass-produced in his facility, and it is the military that is carrying out the operation. Tucker then discloses that a sacrifice is mandatory to bring someone back from the dead. The high-ranking military officials were bringing back their loved ones at the expense of prisoners. Hearing this, Edward is taken aback and disgusted. But before he can inquire more, Lust arrives in the room and kills Tucker for revealing too much information. We learn that Lust is a homunculus, a rare but powerful breed artificially created in the desert using alchemy. Just then, the general, who is the mastermind behind all of this, arrives. He explains that he did all of this to create an army of supernatural beings, and Lust is one of his best warriors. He then turns on the power inside the room, revealing thousands of lifeless creatures inside their pots. The general injects the philosopher's stone into a large tank cylinder, and when the solution enters the creatures' bodies, they start coming to life one by one. The general is excited to see his babies finally take their first steps and goes to greet them. However, to his dismay, they immediately corner him and start tearing him apart. At the same time, Colonel Alphonse Winery and the other generals arrive in the room and team up with Edward to take down the monsters. At first, they are easily outnumbered, and it appears as if they are going to be killed. But then Colonel Mustang figures out that to finish off the creatures, they have to strike their heads using a specific technique. The group eventually succeeds in defeating the creatures. Using this technique, the group eventually starts making some kills. However, the creatures keep coming, forcing Edward and his team to retreat to the side. The battle continues as Lust and her goons show up. Colonel Mustang, still reeling from his earlier injury, somehow manages to conjure up all his strength and unleashes a deadly flame that burns Envy and eventually kills him. After this, the colonel turns his attention to Lust, but all of his attacks are futile. She keeps regenerating her body even after being critically impaled through the chest. As Edward and the colonel look on in astonishment, Lust reveals that she has a philosopher's stone embedded within her chest, which is why she has incredible strength and healing abilities. Unfortunately for her, she reveals the exact thing she shouldn't have. Edward, Alphonse, and the colonel gang up on her and unleash several attacks. When she is distracted, the colonel rips the stone from her chest, killing her instantly. Meanwhile, Gluttony watches all of this from a distance, realizing that his comrades have been killed. He swallows his pride and sneaks out of the place quietly, unwilling to risk his own life. After the battle is finally won, Colonel Mustang hands over the Philosopher's Stone to Edward, saying he can use it to bring his brother back. Edward obliges and starts his alchemy, and the next second, he's brought next to the Gate of Truth. His brother Alphonse is also there, in his true human form. Now, all Edward has to do is hand over the stone to the deity in exchange for his brother. However, at the last moment, he backs out. Edward no longer wants to use the evil stone for personal benefit. Underwatch, tempted by the power of the Philosopher's Stone, plans to use it for personal gain, but he realizes how it can destroy lives. In the final scene, Edward returns to reality and apologizes to his brother for not being able to bring his body back. To his surprise, Alphonse forgives him and says he doesn't want to use alchemy either. "It's okay, brother," he reasons. "I didn't miss my body anyway." They both understand that the forbidden technique put them in this state in the first place, and it's best to refrain from using the stone forever. The movie ends as the two brothers, Winry, and the Colonel stare at the sunset, delighted that they have saved the world. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe for more and turn on notifications. Don't forget to leave a like to support the channel. Thank you for watching.